All right. Hi everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Nonye Ononubu. I'm a licensed agent here in Illinois with eXp Realty. I'm also a licensed instructor. I teach pre-licensing classes. I'm also licensed to do continuing education and stuff, but I haven't done any of those yet. Just doing pre-licensing at the moment. So, hi everyone. And good afternoon. My name is Nonye. Sorry, give me I'm a licensed agent here in Illinois. All right, so sorry about that. Hello, Mr. Goodfella. Whew, sorry to hear about that. But we'll talk about that about today before we wrap up. So just wanted today to talk about brokerage agreements. All right, so that's what I wanted to mention today. So with brokerage agreements, if you remember, these are the agreements that we have with our clients. Okay, so if you're working with a client with a buyer, it will be a buyer agency agreement. If you're working with a seller, it will be a listing agreement. Now, for this channel, if you're new here, welcome, and do consider subscribing. Now, as we talk about the brokerage agreement, now when you're working with clients, right, we one of the chapters that you guys cover is the agency chapter, agency relationship. So in that chapter, it stipulates your relationship with the clients, and then now with the agreement, we're putting it on paper. So saying, okay, I am working with you and these are my responsibilities to you, and also since we're working together, these are also your responsibilities to me. So things like the client also needs to be honest and truthful with you, especially if they're listing a home. They need to let you know if there are any issues with the home that by law they're required to disclose. So they also need to be honest and clear with you as well. All right. So here with brokerage agreements, like I said, if you're working with a seller, it's the listing agreement. If you're working with a buyer, it's the buyer representation or buyer agency agreement. Now, the agreement is an employment contract. And if you notice on the screen, it says between the listing agreement is between the seller and the sponsoring broker. So you as the agent, if you remember from your agency chapter, you are the designated agent who's working with this client or this seller client, right? So we are designated agents. We are essentially appointed by the sponsoring broker to represent that seller. And then if it's a buyer representation agreement, you would then also be the designated agent, the one who has been designated or appointed by the sponsoring broker to work with the buyer. So don't forget that your role is you are a designated agent, and the agreement is with the sponsoring broker and not with the designated agent. So if there's a question where they ask things like, you are working with, let's say agent Tony is working with seller Tom, and agent Tony is in an accident and agent Tony is no longer able to perform their duties. What happens to the agreement? The answer is nothing happens to the agreement because the agreement is not with agent Tony. The agreement is with Tony's sponsoring broker. So the only time that the contract will be terminated in this scenario would be if the sponsoring broker themselves become they're not able to fulfill their function. Maybe the business shut down, bankruptcy, or the owner passes away and everything just collapses, whatever it is. But those types of situations, okay? So not the designated agent, but the sponsoring broker. So remember that the brokerage agreements are with the client and the sponsoring broker. And then the final thing there on the screen is that it establishes the rights and responsibilities of the sponsoring broker and the designated agent, as well as the principal, right? So everyone's rights and responsibilities are addressed in that contract or agreement. All right. So then the next thing is knowing the types of listing agreements that we have here in Illinois, and also the types of buyer agency agreements that, or buyer representation agreements we have in Illinois. So first we'll start with the listing agreements. Okay. So first, there are 4 that you need to know for Illinois. There are 2 that are exclusive, and then the other 2 are not exclusive. So the first one on the screen, there are exclusive rights to sell. Exclusive right to sell listing agreement. The word they're exclusive means that this seller is only working with one broker, one brokerage. So if it's you, you're the only broker the seller is working with. And that broker will be compensated regardless of who brings the buyer. So let's say you're working with seller Nancy, and Nancy puts her property on the market with you with the exclusive rights to sell listing agreement. Nancy's cousin, Mike, all right, sees the listing. Is like, oh, Nancy, I didn't know you were trying to sell your house. I'm interested. I actually wanted to buy this house from you. I've always loved the house and I want to buy it from you. Nancy would then say, well, talk to my broker. So Mike will talk to you, the agent, and you could help Mike draw up the contract and everything. And and you will still get compensated, even though Nancy's cousin, who she introduced to you, is the one who's purchasing the property. Okay. So rights to sell, exclusive rights to sell. The seller is only working with one agent, and that agent gets compensated regardless of who finds the buyer, who brings the buyer. The second kind is your exclusive agency listing agreement. So it's also exclusive, but that means the seller is only working with one broker, right? So it's exclusive, seller's only working with one broker. However, the seller reserves the right to find their own buyer and will only compensate the broker if the broker is the one who found the buyer. So if we go back to our example with Nancy and Mike, all right, you're working with Nancy, exclusive agency. Mike reaches out to Nancy and says, hey, I really like your house. I want to buy your house. Nancy can sell her house directly to Mike and not compensate you as the agent. All right. So there's the exclusive right to sell and then exclusive agency listing agreement. Now, there's something else that you need to remember about exclusive brokerage agreements. I'll cover it at the end, but I wanted to just plant it in your head and see if you remember. If you remember, go ahead and drop it in the comments. If you don't, that's okay. We'll cover it later, right? So the next type is the open listing. So if you notice, there's no exclusive there, right? So it's not an exclusive agreement. This is, as the word says, open to whomever. So this seller is telling any broker, any agent that's available, hey, if you bring me a buyer, I will pay you. So the seller will only compensate the person who brings a buyer, and the seller can work with as many agents as they want. Now, this is not as popular in my market, but there are places where you would find this type of listing is more popular. So in those types of areas, you may see a house with multiple for sale signs from different brokerages, and each designated agent there has their phone number, and then a buyer could drive up to the home and just call one of the agents. Whoever picks up the phone shows them the house and essentially brings that buyer to the seller is the one who's going to get compensated. All right, so this is your open listing. And the final one is the net listing. Here, with net listing, think about like gross versus net. So with your paycheck, for example, you have your gross pay and then your net pay. The net pay is what you get to take home. So it's the same concept here with a net listing. The seller has an amount of money they want to take home with them when they close on that sale, right? And then they're promising the agent whatever I make above the nets that I want to take home is your compensation. For example, the seller says, I want to take home at least $50,000. So let's say at the end of the day, the amount the seller gets is 55,000. So then you will get 5,000 because the seller gets 50. Okay. Now, if the seller says, I want to get 50,000, but the seller only gets 45, guess what? They didn't make anything up to the 50, and so you will not get anything, right? So that's how the net listing works. Now, net listings are legal in Illinois. However, they are not recommended or they're frowned upon because there's a potential for fraud. Now, as a real estate agent, you might be dealing with someone who does not know the value of their property. And so they may tell you, okay, I'm fine getting 50 grand and going home with that. But you know they can probably get up to 80. So you're thinking, okay, they get their 50 and they go home with that. I make the difference, right? I make the remaining 30. And so that's kind of why a lot of brokerages too will not honor a net listing because the potential for fraud is huge and they don't want the liability. Okay, so the 4 types of listing agreements: your exclusive right to sell, exclusive agency, open listing, and then your net listing. All right. Now, on this next slide here, I talk about terminating a listing agreement. And the same thing would most likely apply for buyer agency agreements as well, terminating buyer agency agreements. Now, the first one, if either parties die or become incapacitated. So if you remember earlier, when I was telling you that the agreement is between the sponsoring broker and the seller. So that's what I'm also talking about here. So either party would be either the seller or the sponsoring broker, not you, the designated agent. All right. So please make a note of that so that if you get that question on the exam, you answer correctly. Okay. If there is a breach of contract, either the broker or the client breaches the contract, that could also be grounds for termination. And what's a breach? A breach is a violation. Okay, so you're not doing what you said you would do. For example, the agent is not taking care of their client like they should, or they're not presenting all offers like the contract says they should. Or let's say the seller is not being honest, or the seller wants you to do things that are illegal, right? So that's a breach because they're not complying with the law. And some of these things I'm talking about where maybe the seller is not being compliant with the law. So think about fair housing, right? So that's one of the main things that we also cover in class, fair housing laws. So if your seller doesn't want to comply with fair housing laws, you probably should drop that person because that's a breach in the contract. Because in the contract, it says, at least in the one that we use, it says that the seller will be compliant with fair housing laws. So if they're not, now as an agent, you can terminate your sponsoring broker can terminate the contract in that situation, right? Because you don't want to be a part of that, right? If you remember from the fair housing chapter, you may lose your license, but it's also a criminal case, like a federal case. So yeah, it's just not where you want to be as a person. It's not worth that one client. Okay. Second to last one, their mutual agreement. Both parties could just agree, hey, let's cancel this for whatever reason. And the last one, if the property is transferred by law, foreclosure, bankruptcy, eminent domain is another one. Right? So if the government is taking over ownership of the property, then we can't sell it on the general market. All right. So those will be grounds for termination. And so that's your listing agreement. Remember the four: exclusive right to sell, exclusive agency, open listing, and then net listing. Now on the buyer's side, buyer agency agreement, we have the, again, the buyer is the principal or buyer is the principal or the client. Remember, principal and client could be used interchangeably. The buyer is the principal, the sponsoring broker is the other party. And the purpose of this agreement is to help them find a suitable property to purchase, right? So the types, there are three that you need to remember. Exclusive buyer agency agreement. This second one that's so long, exclusive agency buyer agency agreement. And the third one is the open buyer agency agreement. These three essentially mirror the three listing agreements. So the first one, exclusive buyer agency agreement, is like the exclusive right to sell. Exclusive agency buyer agency agreement is like the exclusive agency listing agreement. And then your open is the same with the open, right? So exclusive buyer agency agreement. It's also known as exclusive rights to represent. So remember, similar to exclusive right to sell. So exclusive buyer agency agreement or exclusive rights to represent. Please know the second name because you may see it called that on the exam. Because it's exclusive, the buyer is only working with one broker, one agent, right? And the broker gets compensated regardless of who finds the property. So if the buyer finds a property that's for sale by owner, for example, the agent will still get compensated. Okay. Now on this second one, exclusive agency buyer agency agreement, it's exclusive, so the buyer is only working with one agent. However, the buyer reserves the rights to find their own property, and they will only compensate the agent, or the agent will only be compensated if the agent is the one who finds the home. Okay, so the buyer is working with one agent, and the agent will be compensated if the agent is the one who helps this buyer find the home. And the third one is your open buyer agency agreement. Here, the buyer is working with multiple agents and essentially is saying, whoever finds me a house will get compensated, all right? So that's your open buyer agency agreement. Now, with the open buyer agency agreement in our local market, right, we have one MLS. So all exclusive listing agreements are put in the MLS. So if a buyer is working with multiple people in the same market, we're all pulling from the same database. And so we're all going to be sending this buyer the same property. All right, so keep that in mind and know if this is something that you would like to do. If you would want to be have an open buyer agency agreement with your buyer, right? Because you could do work with them and still not get compensated. But it may be a good way to start just to get your feet wet with showing property and things like that. So I wouldn't say don't do it because you may be the lucky one who helps them find the property, but keep that in mind that you may not get compensated for the work that you are doing. All right, so those are the buyer agency agreements that we have with our clients, and these are all legal in Illinois as well. Let me just look real quick. See, let me know too in the chat if you have any questions about these or if you have other questions that you want us to address. Just go ahead and put them in the chat and we can definitely talk about them later afterwards. All right, so we'll have time to discuss that. All right, so earlier I mentioned that exclusive agency agreements, exclusive brokerage agreements, right? There was something about them that you also need to remember. And so this is what I was talking about. All exclusive brokerage agreements must have an expiration date, okay? So if I'm going into an exclusive agreement with you, we need to put a date when it ends. we can pick the date. It's negotiable. We could do a year. We could do 2 years, right? You could do 6 months, 2 months, whatever it is, but it must have an expiration date. All right. And it cannot have automatic renewals. So what does that mean? Think about your subscription services. So for example, if you have Netflix, if you have Apple TV, Amazon Prime, whatever, right? You pay like Netflix, for example, you pay monthly. So every month, they don't come to you and say, hey, do you want to renew for the next month? And then you say yes, and then they charge you for it. Instead, what happens is when it's your date for renewal, they automatically charge your card, and then it's an automatic renewal. So for our brokerage agreements, we cannot have automatic renewals. What we can have, though, is our expiration date gets there, right? So then you have that conversation with your clients. Hey, our agreement is expiring on Friday. Do you want to extend it for another month? Or do you want to extend it for another 6 months, for example? This could happen when you have a listing, right? Now the market is a little slower. And so properties are staying on the market longer than normal, right? So let's say you get a listing agreement and it's for 6 months. The property stays on the market for a little while, and then in month 5, it goes under contract, okay? Remember, your agreement is till month 6. So it's currently under contract, it's getting to month 6, okay? And we haven't closed yet. So then you reach out to your client and say, hey, can we extend it a little bit until we close? So you would decide on how long you want to extend it, okay? So that happens in like a normal market, not kind of like what we've had recently. We've had things expire and things like that. So that happens as well. All right. So remember the purpose for the brokerage agreement. Okay. It's the employment contract. All right. The employment contract between the buyer or seller, or landlord and tenant, actually. Okay. Buyer, seller, landlord, or tenant, with the agent. And remember that it's with the sponsoring broker. So the agreement between the sponsoring broker and the principal. And your principal or client could be buyer, seller, landlord, or tenant. Then you, as a broker, will be named as the designated agent for that client or principal. Okay. So that's about it for today's lesson on brokerage agreements. And so I will just open it up to any questions or about brokerage agreements, or it could be on other topics too. So feel free to drop them in the chat and we could talk about them. Okay. And I'm just typing in the chat here. Okay, can licenses share info within the same brokerage? Okay, good question. So you're asking if it depends on the information you're talking about, all right? So can I share confidential information within the brokerage? The answer is no, okay? Because you, as the designated agent, you owe fiduciary duties to your client. But if it's something where I need to talk to my sponsoring broker about a specific client, remember the agreement is with the sponsoring broker. So I can go to them or go to my designated managing broker and talk to them about that specific client, all right? But if you can clarify what you mean by share information, all right, then maybe the answer will be yes, right? But nothing confidential. Even let me give you an example here. Let's say that I have a listing, okay? the property is priced at 300, and then we go under contract. Okay, the amount that we go under contract for, okay, I'm not supposed to disclose that amount except if my client gives me permission to do so, even to people in my brokerage. Okay, so that's essentially confidential. The only people who will know are the people processing the documents in your office. So maybe some office staff that you hire, or the sponsoring broker, managing broker, whoever is working with that, right? But I wouldn't be telling other agents, oh, I listed this property for 300 and I'm selling it for 310, right? That's not something that I would be doing in the office, because except if my client gave me specific instructions to do so, able to share it with other people. Hope that clarifies and helps you understand the question. All right, so in the chat, it says, I am studying for my state portion, took it a few weeks ago, I missed it by 1 point. Yeah, that's the hardest part when you're just so close. And just trying to figure out, okay, what, how do I get over the hump so that I get it the next time? So a few things. It's discouraging. Just it's okay to be upset. That's what I'm trying to say. So be upset if you need to be upset, but learn from the experience. Okay, always make sure that you learn from the experience, so that it's not a wasted experience. So with the state portion, know the laws, okay, and know what you can or cannot do. That's mostly state. Anything that's confidential, you're not sharing, okay? Because remember, we have fiduciary duties. We don't share information with people in our brokerages. We don't also work for different brokerages. You're only working for your sponsoring broker, and that's where you hang your license, okay? Remember, IDFBR is the body that administers the licensing laws. Know the licensing laws. Know when our licenses expire, the ages that you have to be to apply for the license, and a bunch of stuff that we also talked about last time too. Grounds for discipline, all right? Who needs to be licensed, right? Those types of things. And then the exemptions too, maybe those who do not need to be licensed in order to practice. All right, so I hope that was beneficial, or gave you some insight of things to kind of review as you prepare to take it again. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to hang on just for a little bit, because I think there's a lag with the Zoom. So if you have any more questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and I will answer. Okay. Actually, let me ask you guys this question. What's one major thing from like taking the exam, or rather, yeah, taking the course and then the exam? Like, what do you feel is missing between those two? Because I know who else is watching, but between Mr. Goodfella and Genevieve, like, you guys have taken the exam before. So what do you think is missing between the class and then the exam? Like, if you were to say something was missing, what would it be? Okay, so in the chat it says, sorry, finance is the part you struggle with. Okay. Okay. Did you get a lot of finance type questions? And is there somewhere I can find who isn't required to have license? Yes, it should be in your book as well. What book do you use? What textbook do you use? Let me see if I have it. Because if I have it, I may be able to point you in the direction where to look. So a few of them that I remember off the top of my head, those who don't need to be licensed. If you're selling your own home, you don't need to be licensed, right? Anyone can sell their own property or lease their own property. If you are a resident manager, okay? Resident manager, meaning you manage the property where you live for the owner, then you don't need to be licensed. If you are a federal or state employee and you're performing your job, so the state is selling land, so you could sell the land for the state, or federal land, you're selling it for the federal government as part of your job, right? That would be okay. You don't need to be licensed. So those are a few of them. If you're a power of attorney, for example, then you don't need to be licensed as well. Genevieve, your book, it should be in like chapters 1 and 2, somewhere in there. And then also, if you look in the leasing chapter, there are a few exemptions in there as well. But chapters 1 and 2, I think, are licensing law for you in your book. Okay, so for the course, it says the course is very straightforward with info, but the test has a lot of questions that are not in the book. I feel like that's true. And that's why when people are like, and the exam, they keep changing it. And also the way the question is phrased is different on the exam than it is in your book. And that's why I try to tell you, like, you got to think critically about it and use like test taking techniques to figure out how you can understand the question, filter out the wrong answers, and just pick the right one. You may not know the answer, but you may be able to figure out which one is correct from like certain keywords and things like that. Know vocabulary as well, because if you know the words, then you're able to say, okay, for example, if I see a question about eminent domain, I know what it's not, right? So I can eliminate those ones as not the right answer and then pick one that is probably the right answer. So vocabulary too is key. Also, the test goes out of their way to confuse you when it's not necessary. Yes, the test does. The test wants you to think. They're not going to test you like 1 + 1 is 2. They're not going to ask you that kind of a question. They would be like 1 × 1 - 2 + 5. And you're just like, wait, what? Right? So one thing I do when I'm testing is, if you guys notice, if you're reading with your eyes alone and reading in your mind, you read quicker than if you have to read with your lips. So what I do is when I'm taking the exam, I read and move my lips so that it slows me down, and then I'm able to like go word for word as I'm reading the questions, because I can skim through something and miss certain words and then answer the question incorrectly. But if I slow down and just take it like word for word and just slowly like process each word, then it helps me a lot when I'm taking tests. So that's what I do. And hopefully that helps you. The state has less info to find for studying. Yes, the state does have less information, and that's why it's only 40 questions. And so you notice, if you Genevieve, if to your question, if you go to the candidate handbook, and I should have a link in the description. If you go to the candidate handbook, you will then see like the portions that you're supposed to study. It's only like 4 sections. right? That you have to study for the state portion, right? So a lot of what they'll ask is like scenario questions to figure out if you understand how to apply the information. Okay, there's a lot of application analysis, those types of questions, and recall as well. Those are the three ones. So recall, if you see a word, do you really understand what it means? And then can you apply it in a scenario? And also, yeah, so application, and then analysis, how well can you like review a situation and decide what's best to do? So those are things to think about. Oh, yes, yes. Oh, Mr. Goodfellow, did you take it remotely? Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, you can't do that when you're taking it remotely because they will think you're talking to someone. Yes. Yeah, I keep forgetting that you could take it remotely. Have you done it? And what was that experience like, if you don't mind sharing? Because um yeah, I have not, and I don't think I want to, but because I live around a bunch of sites, so I have options. But people in, you know, downstate New York, sorry, downstate New York, um, downstate Illinois, they don't have a lot of options. Yes, yes. So you got a lot of warnings reading the question to myself without saying it. Yeah, yeah. I keep forgetting that. That's a problem. I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't even know how you would overcome that. Maybe, maybe use a pencil or something to like, and I don't know if they're gonna flag you for that, but like use a pencil and kind of like guide you on the screen. I don't know if they will flag you for that either, but yeah, the proctors are really, really strict. And I know you can't take breaks, you can't like look around because then it's like, what are you looking at? And things like that. And maybe that's what's adding to like your nervousness as you're taking the exam. Yeah, they make you show your entire room, the desk area. Yep. Yep. They watch you very closely. Yes. Yeah, I read about it and I was just like, I don't think I can do that. Again, because I'm in an area that has a lot of testing sites. But if you have money, maybe that's something to invest in. Open a testing site in your area. Because I did have a couple students who were like in some towns in southern Illinois, and we looked it up together during class, and some of the sites were like 3 hours away, and it was ridiculous. So that might be a business opportunity for you. It's definitely a need in that area. Wow, looking up for more than 10 seconds. Yep. Yeah. All right. Well, this was helpful though, because I've been looking for someone who's taking it remotely, and I'm glad you're sharing your experience. Because for me, I read everything and I was just like, this is too much. It's not something that I want to do at all. Yeah. Okay. All right. So anything else? Yes, third time's a charm. Try to, I don't know, because you're taking it remotely. That's harder to even, but do you know, like, Mr. Goodfellow, from the breakdown that they give you, right? From the breakdown they give you, are there some like, are you, because oh yeah, you said financing. I'm wondering if it's been the same for both times you've taken it, if it was just financing that was the issue. And same for you, Genevieve, like which section was more difficult for you, and seeing like how you can potentially um make that work. Oh, you two took it remotely, Genevieve? Sheesh, you guys are brave. Well, then again, it depends on where you live, though. So I can't really say that. Um, it's a lot of pressure with someone staring at you for 2 hours. Yes. And that's why I'm saying, yeah, it might be better to take it in person if you're able to. Because I feel like just having someone watching you and you can't even stretch, you can't take a break, you can't use the bathroom, you can't drink water. Like, that's a lot of pressure. So if you're able, do that. Because I know when I test, I get up and I use the bathroom just to like reset my brain. Okay. All right. So I think we'll wrap it up for today here. Thank you so much for joining. Hope this was helpful to you. And let me know in the comments and such, like if there are other topics to cover. I'll kind of think about what I can do for next week that will be beneficial. Maybe like last Genevieve, if you can watch last week's live, I kind of went over what like certain things on the state portion, so you could check that out for yourself. Okay. Okay. All right. So you guys have a wonderful week. Stay warm. And I'll see you guys next week.